My girlfriend invited her guy best friend to our date, barely acknowledged me, then accused me of being controlling when I walked out. They joked about prom and pool parties while I sat there in silence, covering the drinks. Hi, I'm Jake. I'm 26, and I honestly thought our 2-year anniversary would be a low-key evening for just the two of us, right up until she walked in with another man at her side. Let me back up a bit. Lily, who's 24, was supposed to meet me at this small, warm steakhouse downtown. I'd spent close to 3 weeks lining everything up, reservations locked in, flowers picked out, even requesting that specific table by the window, because she always said she loved how city lights reflected off the glass. I wore the only blazer I own that still has all the buttons, the one I usually save for job interviews or moments that actually matter. That morning she sent me a text, super casual. Hey babe, my best friend's back in town, so I invited him to come with us tonight. You're cool with that, right? Her best friend was Mark, a guy who'd always hovered around our relationship like a half-told ghost story, mentioned just enough to feel uncomfortable but never explained fully. Of course I wasn't cool with it. Still, Lily had this way of making me feel bad just for having limits, so I told myself to chill out, told myself it was just dinner. When I arrived, Mark was already sitting there, my reserved cocktail halfway gone, his chair leaned back like the place belonged to him. Lily sat across from him, laughing so hard she didn't even notice me at first. I stood there for a second holding her flowers, feeling like some idiot who wandered into the wrong wedding reception. Eventually she looked up and said, Jake, you made it. Mark looked me up and down, smirked, and said, man, you're late. We were about to order another round. I sat down, kept smiling, but felt that familiar tight burn start up behind my ribs. Lily introduced me the way you'd introduce a coworker, not the guy she'd been dating for 2 years. Then they jumped straight into a decade of shared memories, high school pranks, inside jokes, some story about her twisting an ankle at his graduation party, all told back and forth while I sipped water and watched the clock. I tried to shift things. So, Lil, remember our first date? Mark cut me off. Oh dude, speaking of dates, you should have seen her prom hair. They laughed. The waiter came by. I ordered steak. She ordered salmon. Mark asked what their best red wine was. The waiter politely explained their top bottle was a 2012 Bordeaux, $340. Mark grinned and said, perfect, we'll take it. Lily nodded like I'd signed off on it. I almost forgot how to breathe. When they raised their glasses, the toast wasn't to us. It was to old friends and new memories. That's when the anger set in, not hot and explosive, more like ice tightening around my patience. I clinked my glass anyway and pretended the wine didn't taste like straight humiliation. Halfway through the meal, it hit me that I could have been replaced with a cardboard cutout and nothing would have changed. Mark had taken over the table, the conversation, and apparently my credit card. He and Lily traded stories like they were recording a podcast. Remember when we got caught sneaking into the pool? Oh my God, Mark, stop. I kept smiling politely, stabbing my steak like it personally owed me money. Every now and then Lily would grab his arm when she laughed, that easy, familiar touch that made my skin crawl. I kept telling myself she was my girlfriend and this was our anniversary, but it sure didn't feel like it. It felt like I'd crashed their reunion. When the Bordeaux arrived, Mark swirled his glass dramatically and said, now that's real wine, not that cheap grocery store stuff. I almost laughed, not because it was funny, but because he didn't even look at me when he said it, like it wasn't my card about to take the hit. They toasted again. I didn't. After the second course, I made one more attempt. So Lily, remember our lake trip last summer? She nodded without really listening. Yeah, that was fun, then immediately turned back to Mark with, oh my God, remember when we... And they were gone again. When the waiter asked about dessert, I asked for the check. Lily frowned and said already, we were going to get the chocolate souffle. I said. Mark laughed and told me to relax because it was a celebration. Something snapped in me then, not loudly, not visibly, just completely. I excused myself, walked past the bathroom straight to the bar, and quietly asked if I could pay only my portion from table 12. The bartender hesitated but agreed. I did the math fast, my food, my drink, tax and tip, paid cash, even threw in extra because she looked uncomfortable splitting it. Then I walked out the back door, past the smell of garlic and cleaner, and into the cool night. My heart wasn't racing, it was calm, The kind of calm that tells you you're done. I got in my car and drove off before they noticed I was gone. By the time I got home, my phone was buzzing nonstop. 5 missed calls turned into 10, then 20, and when I shut it off for the night, it had hit 50. I slept better than I had in months. The next morning, I turned my phone back on, and it practically exploded with texts and voicemails stacked on top of each other. Messages from Lily saying I was unbelievable, asking how I could leave them there, freaking out about the bill being over $400, and saying she had to call her mom because she was so embarrassed. Then a message from Mark calling me immature and saying I made her cry in public. I replied once, calmly and clearly, saying she invited someone else to our anniversary. He ordered a $340 bottle on my tab, and they ignored me the entire night. So I paid for myself and left. Then I blocked him. A few hours later, Lily showed up at my apartment, pounding on the door. I opened it because I honestly wanted to hear how she'd twist this. She stormed in with red eyes and a voice shaking between anger and guilt, asking how I could embarrass her like that in front of him and everyone else. I looked at her and said, "You mean at our anniversary dinner?" She crossed her arms and said he was her best friend and I was supposed to be okay with that. I told her best friends don't hijack anniversary dinners, and they definitely don't order $300 wine without checking who's paying. She blinked, instantly defensive, and said I was overreacting, that he just wanted to celebrate. Celebrate what? I asked. You're 2 years with him? That landed hard. She went quiet, her jaw tightening before she answered in a flat, icy tone, saying maybe if I weren't so insecure I could handle her having male friends, and that this was exactly why we never worked. I almost laughed. I told her we didn't work because she treated boundaries like polite suggestions instead of real limits. Her eyes flared, and she snapped that I was controlling. No, I said calmly, I'm done being disrespected. I walked to the door and opened it. Take your stuff and go, Lily. She hesitated, staring at me like she couldn't believe I meant it. So you're breaking up with me? Yeah, I said quietly, and you should probably call your best friend to help you carry your bags. She stormed out, throwing every insult she could grab onto as she went down the hall. When the door clicked shut, the silence felt peaceful in a way I hadn't felt in a long time. That peace didn't last, though, because by the weekend she was back, and she didn't come alone. Saturday morning I woke up to raised voices outside my apartment door, 3 of them, Lily's, her sister Erin's, and Mark's. I cracked the door open halfway. Lily stood there with her arms crossed, eyes swollen from either crying or anger, maybe both. Behind her, Mark wore that smug stance of a guy who treats confrontation like a hobby. Erin stood off to the side, holding her phone up like a referee ready to record. Jake, we're here to get her things, Lily said, like she was serving official paperwork. Good, I told her. I already packed everything. I stepped aside. 10 neatly labeled boxes sat against the wall, clothes, makeup, books, hair tools I never understood. I'd boxed it all up quietly the night before because I knew she'd bring an audience. Mark walked in first, looking around my place like he was inspecting a crime scene. You really boxed it all up? That's cold, man. I shrugged. You don't get to talk about cold, Mark. You were drinking my wine and laughing in my face 3 nights ago. He started to say something, but Lily cut him off, asking where her speaker and her posters were. In that box, I said. She ignored me and marched straight into my bedroom, throwing the door open. Where's your vinyl shelf? My stomach dropped. Why? I asked. She turned around, her expression shifting from anger to something sharper, maybe guilt. I helped you store them last month, remember? Where did you put them? The shelf was empty. 30 records gone, all signed, my entire collection, the one I'd been building since college. You took them, I said quietly. Lily crossed her arms and claimed she just helped me store them, and maybe I forgot where I put them. No, I said evenly. You took them. Mark stepped closer, putting himself between us. Whoa, calm down, man. Don't accuse her of stealing. She took my property, I said, looking straight at Lily. You have 24 hours to bring them back, or I file a police report. She smirked and wished me luck proving it. They left with her boxes and my patience. As the elevator doors closed, I knew it wasn't over, and I was right, because 2 days later I found out exactly what she'd done. 2 days later, I learned just how far her spite went. It started with a comment on my podcast page from a listener saying, "Hey man, sorry to hear about your missing vinyls. Hope you get them back." I froze, because I hadn't told anyone they were missing. Then a DM came in asking if it was true my ex was selling signed records on Marketplace. My stomach dropped. I opened Facebook Marketplace, searched for my favorite band, and there it was, my rarest record, signed, limited edition, one of only 100 ever made. The listing read collector's item, mint condition, $1,200 or best offer. Seller name, Lily L. The photos were mine, same lighting, same shelf. She hadn't even changed the background. I took screenshots of everything, every angle, every listing, and emailed them to myself so they were timestamped. Then I called the non-emergency police line. The officer was polite but cautious and asked if I had proof of ownership. I told him yes, pulling up photos of me holding the records and clips from my podcast where I'd shown them on camera, and explained she was selling them online under her own name. He sighed and said they'd need documentation, but if she claimed it was a misunderstanding, it could be considered civil. A misunderstanding, right? I filed the report anyway and then called my renter's insurance, who told me theft was covered, but only with a police report. I didn't sleep that night. The next morning, I found myself in a free legal consultation downtown. The lawyer, a quiet woman named Rachel, listened carefully while I explained everything. When I finished, she nodded and told me I had more evidence than most theft cases she sees, advised me to keep documenting everything, every text, every post, every interaction, and not to contact Lily directly. Let her dig her own hole, she said. I followed that advice. Screenshots, photos, messages, all neatly organized in a desktop folder I titled Proof, Lily. By the third day, I had enough to fill a courtroom binder. Then, out of nowhere, Lily texted me from her sister's phone, asking if I was really calling the cops over some records and calling me a psycho. I didn't reply, but I smiled for the first time in days, because she'd just admitted it in writing. By the end of the week, I was basically running a one-man investigation. Between my day job and podcast work, I was collecting evidence like a detective fueled by caffeine. Every post she deleted, I already had saved. Every angry message calling me crazy became another nail in her coffin. Then something unexpected happened. One of my listeners, a lawyer named Chris, reached out after I briefly mentioned the theft on an episode. He told me he specialized in property law and had listened to my older episodes, pointing out that I had time-stamped video proof of the vinyl collection in my possession, which was gold in court. Combined with her text about helping store them, he said, both ownership and access were clearly established, and I should refile my police report. So I did. This time the officer didn't shrug. He reviewed everything and told me this wasn't civil anymore, and they'd follow up. 2 days later, Lily's sister called me screaming that the cops had shown up and embarrassed her. Her sister did that by showing up at Lily's workplace to question her. And not long after that, Lily texted me again from yet another number, saying I was ruining her life over some stupid records and that she'd give them back if I dropped everything. I didn't reply to her at all. I forwarded the message straight to Rachel, my lawyer, and she got back to me within the hour saying it was perfect, that it counted as both an admission and an attempt to negotiate, and told me to sit tight. Then Mark messaged me on Instagram, apparently thinking he was suddenly the reasonable one, telling me she didn't even have all the records anymore and that some had been damaged while in storage, and that I should just let it go and move on. That was the dumbest possible thing he could have said, because damaged in storage confirmed she had them and that they weren't returned in their original condition. When I sent Rachel those screenshots, she almost sounded happy, telling me we could now add damages to the claim. That same night, I filed the small claims paperwork, suing Lily for $6,500, which covered the market value, estimated damages, and filing fees. It cost me $85 to file. Her response wasn't silence, it was chaos. Her mom called, her sister texted nonstop, and even Mark left me a voicemail that started with "Bro, be a man," and ended with "You're pathetic." I didn't answer a single one, because for once I wasn't reacting emotionally, I was responding legally, and she was about to see what that meant. The court summons must have hit her hard, because the morning after she was served, my phone lit up again with calls from her sister, her mom, and even a cousin I hadn't heard from since high school. Her mom's voicemail started with saying she raised her better than this, and ended with telling me to forgive and move on. Mark texted from yet another number saying Lily was freaking out and might lose her job because of me, and that I needed to drop the case because it was just records. I didn't reply. Instead, I uploaded a new episode of my podcast, keeping it factual and anonymous, telling the story of what happens when someone you love steals from you, covering the dinner, the theft, the denial, and the small claims filing without ever saying her name. People still connected the dots. That episode blew up, hitting 5,000 downloads in a single day, and my inbox filled with messages telling me I was right to stand my ground and not let myself be gaslit. Someone even tagged her workplace in a discussion post about it, which wasn't something I did, but once it was out there, it spread fast. By the end of that week, Lily was placed on administrative leave pending an investigation into personal conduct. That's when Mark completely lost it, messaging me that I'd cost her job over stupid records. I sent one reply, saying she cost herself her job the moment she decided to steal from me. Her mom called again, crying this time, telling me I was destroying her daughter's future, which was ironic considering her daughter tried to destroy the one thing that kept me grounded, my music. 3 weeks later, I got the court date, and Rachel prepared me like I was stepping into a prize fight, telling me to stay calm, state the facts, and let Lily lie first so we could drop the proof. The night before court, I barely slept, not from nerves but from clarity, because the next day wasn't about money anymore. It was about finally standing up to the version of myself that used to fold whenever someone cried loud enough. Court day came in gray and cold, like the weather understood the mood, and I wore the same blazer from that ruined anniversary dinner because the symmetry felt right. Rachel met me in the lobby, calm as always, carrying a stack of evidence thick enough to bury any excuse Lily had rehearsed. When Lily walked in, she looked smaller, no makeup, hair pulled back, dark circles under her eyes, and for a brief second I almost felt bad until I remembered the thousands of dollars worth of signed records she'd sold out of spite. She had a lawyer too, cheap suit, distracted eyes, clearly juggling too many cases. The judge called us forward, her lawyer going first and framing Lily as emotionally distraught after a breakup who mistakenly took items she believed were jointly owned. Mistakenly. Rachel let him finish, then stood and explained we had time-stamped video footage of the collection in my possession, text messages from Lily admitting she stored the items, and messages from her associate confirming they were damaged. She clicked her laptop, and the courtroom screen lit up with a still from my podcast showing me holding my signed vinyl, time-stamped a month before the theft, followed by screenshots of Lily's marketplace listings. The judge leaned in and asked Lily if she disputed that the accounts were hers. Her lawyer whispered to her. She hesitated, then admitted no, but claimed she hadn't sold all of them. The judge asked if she still had the missing records, and after some paper shuffling, her lawyer said she believed they may have been donated by mistake. That was the moment everything shifted. The judge's expression went flat, and she repeated the word donated, pointing out it was a signed limited edition collection valued at over $6,000, and the room went silent. The judgment came quickly, $5,800 in damages plus filing and legal fees, paid in monthly installments. Lily broke down crying. Her mom sobbed even louder behind her, and Mark was nowhere to be seen, which made sense because cowards rarely show up for the end. As we left the courthouse, her mom called after me, saying she hoped I was happy, and I turned once and told her quietly that I wasn't happy, just done. Outside, the air felt lighter and sharper, and I stood on the steps holding the paperwork while Lily's family swarmed around her trying to manage the fallout. Her mom cried, her sister yelled at me, and Lily stared at the pavement like it might open up and swallow her. Aaron shouted that Lily had lost her job and asked how she was supposed to pay $5,800, and I calmly told her she should have thought about that before stealing from me. Her mother tried one last time, softer, saying Lily made a mistake and I didn't have to ruin her life over records. And I almost laughed because Lily ruined her own life the moment she turned theft into part of who she was. Then I walked away. No shouting, no victory lap, no last words. I just left them there in the cold with nothing but their excuses. When I got back home, I finally let out a breath I felt like I'd been holding for months. For the first time in a long while, my apartment didn't feel like a battlefield. I poured myself a drink, sank into the couch, and just listened to the quiet. No yelling. No buzzing phone, no chaos creeping in from every corner. Later that night, I checked my inbox and found dozens of messages from listeners offering support, sharing empathy, even admitting they'd been through something eerily similar. It surprised me how many people had been humiliated by someone they loved. The next day, Lily's first $300 payment came through. Small but undeniable proof that justice sometimes shows up in monthly installments. Through mutual friends, I heard she was working retail now, since the nonprofit she used to work for didn't take her back after the theft charge. Mark completely disappeared, blocked me everywhere after court, which honestly felt like a favor. The 18 records she returned were scratched, cracked, barely playable, and the rest, the rare signed pressings, were gone for good, probably sold off or donated, like she claimed. Insurance covered most of the loss, but some things just can't be replaced, and maybe they aren't meant to be. Because for the first time in years, I stopped letting people treat me like a doormat with a debit card, and that was worth more than every vinyl she ruined. About a week after the ruling, life slowly found its rhythm again, quieter, steadier, almost unsettlingly normal. I went back to recording my podcast without checking my phone every 5 minutes, without bracing myself for which version of Lily might show up next, the crying one, the angry one, or the one who acted like nothing ever happened. My apartment felt different too, not just emptier, but lighter, like the air itself had changed now that I wasn't constantly walking on eggshells. I'd forgotten that silence could feel like peace. Every month, the same email from the court payment system showed up. Installment received, $300, and I didn't celebrate or even open them most days, because it wasn't about the money anymore. It was about knowing I didn't fold and that I followed through. Therapy helped more than I expected. My therapist asked me one question that stuck with me. What did you really lose? I thought about it and realized it wasn't just records. It was the illusion that love means endurance, that caring about someone requires tolerating whatever they throw at you. I learned that boundaries aren't walls, they're doors, and you get to decide who's allowed through. I started dating again, slowly and carefully, and met someone named Tessa, quiet, sharp, funny in a dry way that sneaks up on you. The first time we went out to dinner, she looked me in the eye when I spoke, didn't interrupt, didn't treat attention like a favor. When the bill came, she reached for it before I could and said we'd split it, adding with a grin that there'd be no $340 wine this time, which made me laugh harder than I had in months. My podcast kept growing, hitting 10,000 listeners, with people writing in to say my story helped them stand up to exes, bosses, even family members who didn't respect their boundaries. I never planned to turn my mess into advice, but sometimes the thing that breaks you ends up helping someone else heal. I still think about that dinner now and then, the clink of glasses, the quiet moment when I decided to walk out the back door, because that was when everything changed, when I stopped waiting to be treated right and chose to leave instead. By the third month, the lawsuit and the noise had faded into background static, and Lily went silent. No calls, no fake apologies, no new drama. Just the occasional court payment showing up on time like a ghost clock. Then one night, a text came in from an unknown number saying, "You really think you won, huh?" And I knew instantly it was Mark. I stared at it for a second, then deleted it, because I wasn't feeding that fire again. The next morning, I checked my podcast inbox and found a message from a listener named Nora H., who said she was going through a breakup just like mine and that my story helped her walk away before she lost more than her self-respect. And that hit harder than I expected. I used to think walking away meant failure, but now I understood it meant choosing peace. Some nights I still replay it all in my head. The dinner, the laughter, the humiliation that pushed me out the door, but instead of anger I feel detached, like I'm watching someone else's movie. My therapist calls that closure. I call it growing a spine. Lily's payments kept coming like clockwork, and while I didn't track them, I noticed she never missed one. Maybe because guilt is a better motivator than interest rates. One afternoon, my phone buzzed with a random Venmo request, $20 from Lily, description reading, "The wine you didn't drink," and I laughed out loud before declining it, because as much as I hated to admit it, her sense of irony survived the wreckage. Later that night, I was recording an episode when Tessa stopped by with Thai food and asked if she could listen live, sitting quietly while I talked about boundaries, trust, and how sometimes the best revenge is peace. When I finished, she smiled and said I sounded lighter, and she was right, because somewhere between the courtroom and the quiet, I stopped being the guy who got blindsided at dinner and became the guy who walked out and never looked back. By month 6, life didn't just settle down, it started to feel genuinely good again, in simple ways. Cooking without tension, leaving my phone on without dread, laughing without checking who might be watching. Tessa and I had become something real, no drama, no emotional landmines, and she knew the whole story, not the podcast version but the raw one. And when I told her how Lily once called me controlling for not wanting to bankroll her best friend's drinking, she shook her head and said that wasn't control, that was self-respect, and hearing someone say that out loud changed something in me. Work picked up too. My podcast eventually picked up sponsors, nothing glamorous, just enough to cover rent and keep me caffeinated, and I even got invited to guest host a live recording at a small local event, which wasn't lost on me at all. The guy who'd been practically invisible at his own anniversary dinner was now standing in front of a room full of people who actually wanted to hear what he had to say. Still, closure is never clean or convenient. It tends to show up sideways. Like the day my phone buzzed with a friend's story showing Lily at a thrift store, arguing with a cashier over a record she claimed she'd accidentally donated. The universe has a dark, twisted sense of humor. That night, I opened my laptop and scrolled through old photos, not of her, but of my shelf before it was empty, the records lined up, the turntable, the soft glow of the lamp. It didn't hurt anymore. It just reminded me how cheaply I used to give away my peace. I leaned back and smiled a little, realizing the best part of losing everything you thought you needed is discovering what you never should have put up with in the first place. And for the first time since that dinner, I didn't feel like a character in her story anymore. I felt like the one writing my own. By the time summer rolled in, the whole mess had faded into a memory, its sharp edges smoothed down by time. The court payments kept arriving, slow and steady, until I stopped checking altogether, because the money was never really the point. It was proof that I'd stood my ground. My parents came to visit one weekend, and even though they knew about the breakup, they didn't know the details. Over dinner, my dad asked carefully if I was doing better now. I told him honestly that I was probably doing better than I had in years. He nodded like he understood more than he said and mentioned that sometimes people teach you exactly how not to be treated. Tessa smiled at that. After dinner, she and my mom washed dishes together while my dad and I sat on the porch, quiet for a long time, until he finally said he was proud of me and that I'd stopped giving away my peace for free. That hit deeper than I expected. Later that night, after they left, I stood by my window thinking about how different life felt now. The silence wasn't lonely anymore, it was earned. Lily never tried contacting me again, and through the grapevine I heard she'd moved to another city, working at some small boutique, and trying to start over. Maybe she learned something, maybe she didn't, but either way it wasn't my chapter anymore. I pulled a record from what was left of my collection, one of the few survivors, and let it play, scratchy and imperfect but real, while I scrolled through listener messages. One said they'd left a toxic relationship because of my podcast and thanked me for showing that walking away isn't weakness. I stared at that message for a long moment, then smiled, because somewhere between heartbreak, lawsuits, and quiet nights, I'd stopped surviving someone else's chaos and started thriving in my own peace. When autumn arrived, it brought a calm I hadn't felt in years. Leaves fell, the city slowed, and so did I. One afternoon I sat in my studio with the mic on, recording an episode called When Peace Feels Unfamiliar, not about Lily directly, but about how getting used to chaos can make calm feel suspicious, like silence must be hiding something. Afterward, Tessa and I went to a small diner, nothing fancy, just comfort food and easy laughter without strings attached. When the bill came, she reached for it and told me she had this one and not to argue, so I didn't, because it wasn't about money, it was about partnership, something I'd never really had before. On the drive home, she said I tell my stories like I'm closing doors, but she thinks I'm actually opening one, and that line stuck with me. A few weeks later, I got an unexpected email from Rachel with the subject line "Case closed." Lily had made her final payment early, balance zero. I stared at that line for a while, then shut my laptop and laughed quietly, not in triumph, but in relief. That night, I took Tessa to a small record fair downtown, rows of old crates, and that familiar dusty smell, and I found a copy of the same album Lily had stolen and sold, not signed or rare, just right, so I bought it. Back home, I played it on the turntable, the sound crackling softly like a beginning wrapped in static, and Tessa leaned on my shoulder and joked that it was funny how all of this started with wine. I told her it ended with peace. I thought that was the end of the story, but it wasn't. A week later, a letter showed up in my mailbox, postmarked from her city, written in handwriting I hadn't seen in months. I let it sit there for 2 days before opening it. No return address, just my name in her looping cursive. Inside was a single folded page that still smelled faintly of cheap perfume. She wrote that she knew she didn't have the right to ask anything, but asked me to read it anyway. She said she was sorry, not the kind of sorry that tries to fix things or explain them away, but the kind that settles heavy because it comes too late. She wrote that losing the case, the job, even her reputation hadn't hurt as much as realizing she'd become exactly the kind of person she used to judge, that she was in therapy now, living with her sister, working 2 part-time jobs just to stay afloat. Then one line stopped me cold. She said she found one of my records, the rare one, that she couldn't bring herself to sell it, that it was scratched but still mine, and that if I wanted it back it was waiting at the shop where she worked. I sat there for a long time with the letter shaking in my hands, torn between staying done and sealed or letting curiosity win. Curiosity won. 2 days later, I drove to a small thrift shop on the edge of town. She wasn't there. An older clerk handed me a record wrapped in a brown paper sleeve. The signature was faded, the vinyl scuffed, but it was real. My name was still written on the back, the same shaky handwriting from years ago, and when I saw it, something in me settled. I took the record home, cleaned it slowly and carefully, and slid it back onto the shelf, not like a prize, but like a marker. Because forgiveness doesn't mean reopening the door for someone who hurt you. Sometimes it just means putting the story down so you can walk away with both hands free. I never went back to that shop, and I didn't feel the need to. The record was enough, a full circle pressed into vinyl, scratched and imperfect, just like every lesson I didn't know I was collecting along the way. I placed it between 2 others on the shelf and realized there was no anger left in me anymore. Just distance, the healthy kind. Life didn't blow up after that moment. It simply unfolded, quietly and steadily. My podcast kept growing, sponsors calling, messages stacking up from strangers telling me they left bad situations because of my story, and it still amazes me how pain turns into language once you stop whispering it. A few months later, Tessa and I moved in together, and on our first night in the new place, she noticed the record on the shelf and asked if that was the one. I nodded, and she smiled and said it stays. No jealousy, no interrogation, just understanding. That kind of peace doesn't announce itself, but you feel it deep in your bones. Some nights I think about Lily, not with anger, but with a strange sense of gratitude, because without her chaos I wouldn't have learned what boundaries really cost when you ignore them, or that walking away isn't quitting, it's reclaiming your oxygen. A year to the day after that dinner, Tessa and I went back to the same steakhouse, same corner table, same crisp white napkins, and when the waiter asked about wine we both laughed. House red, I said, 1 glass, we'll share. We toasted not to survival or revenge, but to self-respect. Before we left, I looked around the room and thought about the version of me who once sat there, invisible between laughter and a $340 bottle he never ordered, and I wished I could reach back and tell him he was allowed to leave, that he didn't owe anyone his silence. Now I tell other people that for a living, every episode, every story, every scar turned into a warning light for someone else driving through the dark. The record still plays, scratches and all, but the sound isn't broken anymore. It's proof. Proof that even when love turns into noise, you can still find your rhythm again. Because sometimes the real anniversary worth celebrating is the day you finally walk out the door, and maybe that's the whole point of heartbreak. It teaches you how to hear yourself again, the quiet, the stillness, the steady pulse under your ribs that says you made it. I don't play the record often, but when I do, I let it spin all the way to the end, every pop, every scratch, every second of static reminding me I survived, I grew, I learned, and I stayed gone.